Chapter 1. Are you born a criminal? Criminals constitute one of the most disruptive forces in life, and their prevalence in every social and economic sector makes it a common problem for everyone. While fining and jailing have in some cases served to demotivate criminals, there are also individuals who have notoriously become repeat criminals, irrespective of the severity of any punishment meted to them. It is such observations that have made the nature of criminals a topic of interest for law enforcers, psychologists, sociologists, and the society in general. For a long time, criminologists have been known to seek motivation for crime in the offender's social environment and circumstances, such as unstable family setup, presence of gangs in the community, poverty, and such other negative influencing societal factors. Durkheim's theory. In fact, this line of thinking was backed by the truism of Émile Durkheim, a renowned French sociologist who died in 1917, whose basic premise was that every social fact always has a social explanation. Besides sociologists, this theory was supported by several thought leaders in the society, including politicians and prominent journalists. And for this reason, lining up some people for questioning, even when there was no evidence to tie them to a particular crime, would be tolerated. It is easy to understand why this theory from Durkheim received immense support, considering the exposition he provides to his theory. The explanation underlines the existence of social realities that influence the behavior of individuals, in a manner that is beyond the capacity of any of them to resist. In short, the society is stronger than the individual, and is hence responsible for the actions of the individual. One of the major facts that Durkheim cites in support of his theory is the presence of crime not only in all types of society, but also in every strata of society. In his argument, he reckons that if social influence was not more powerful than that of the individual, then there would be no crime in civilized societies, where individuals have significantly progressed. In short, in Durkheim's view, there is nothing pathological about criminals, and the nature of societies is such that crime must exist. Adoption of genetic theories. While not dismissing the role of society in breeding criminals, present-day experts have found other theories that show criminal behavior as being influenced by other factors as well, one of them being biological. This means there are experts who view cases of criminal behavior as being more genetic than environmental, especially when it comes to repeat criminals. After analyzing arguments both linked to genetic predisposition and environmental influence, some experts like Richard J. Herrnstein and James Q. Wilson came to the conclusion that both factors were responsible for creating and influencing criminals. The two were Harvard professors, the former an expert in psychology and the latter an expert in public administration. They found that chances of crime being committed rose when people who were biologically predisposed found themselves in social circumstances that enhanced criminal behavior. In their view, one of the two elements does not, on its own, lead to crime. Among the factors they cited as giving credence to their position on criminal behavior were that younger people were several times more likely to be linked to crime than older ones. For example, 18-year-olds versus 40-year-olds. In the US, for example, young people were found to be more likely to be arrested for serious property-related crimes than the older ones. It was also found that men are more likely to be involved in criminal activity than women. In fact, studies based in Malawi and Brunei indicated that the ratio of young people likely to commit crime in comparison to the older ones is 20 to 1. while in the US, the ratio ranges from 4 to 1 to 6 to 1. Some people argue that the reason for these variations in criminal behavior is that many societies instill in their boys the notion that they need to cultivate aggressiveness in order to grow into protectors of their female kin and of their communities. Others argue that some hormonal changes in adolescent boys require that they be given a positive outlet. Yet this does not happen as they remain confined within the school system. This leaves them unfulfilled and hence likely to be unruly in their search for an outlet. However, these arguments have been challenged by the fact that differences in crime rates by the young versus the old, and the male versus the female, remain disparate even in societies that are not restrictive in the responsibilities young boys undertake. This fact also holds where boys do not attend school, and are therefore not subjected to systems that restrict how much responsibility they take on, and how they go about doing things. It has also been established that girls tend to manifest behavior of a more timid nature than boys even as infants, when social norms have not begun to influence them. Such facts have led other modern experts to conclude there is a genetic element to criminal behavior. For example, two professors of psychology, Dr. Eleanor E. Maccabee of Stanford University and Carol N. Jacqueline of the University of Southern California, have noted that the degree of aggressiveness people manifest is linked to their sex hormones as individuals, such as testosterone, and this is higher in males than in females. This position has been confirmed through studies carried out with athletes as the subjects, and other times the subjects being prisoners. Both categories of subjects were appropriate for the experiments, because while athletes are known to be domineering, prisoners are known to be violent. The general concurrence among these experts and supporters of their theory is that there is a biological predisposition to aggressiveness. The significance of the studies conducted by Maccabee and Nagy and their results is that aggression is a major component of crime, and hence, understanding the causes of aggression could help unravel the mystery of crime. The role of testosterone in aggression. In support of the position that males are more prone to crime because of their predisposition to aggressiveness, are study findings that indicate the higher an individual's level of testosterone, the more aggressive that person is likely to be. It is also significant that the impact testosterone has on a person's brain, according to the studies, starts right at the embryo stage of development, and this is evident even in early development of the DNA. Biologically, as cortisol works alongside serotonin to suppress aggression, testosterone activates those subcortical brain regions that initiate aggression. Meanwhile, men's level of testosterone after metabolism is 20 times above that of women, making the premise that men are more aggressive, and therefore more prone to becoming criminals, supportive of this train of thought. Twins' similarity in levels of delinquency. Experiments based on over 1,500 sets of twins have also served to give credence to the premise that biology plays an important role in making certain individuals predisposed to criminal behavior. These experiments were conducted across the globe, including Japan, Britain, Scandinavia, Germany, the US, and other countries. It was established that when one of a set of identical twins was delinquent, the other was found to be delinquent as well, a similarity not obvious in fraternal twins. This was the same finding of Carl O. Christensen, an early criminologist from Denmark, whose study on twin delinquency was based on police records and those from courts and prisons. Similar findings are attributed to David Rowe. a University of Oklahoma psychologist, whose study was based on high school twins. It was noted in the study that while identical twins matched in their level of delinquency, having friends in common and engaging in similar activities did not seem to influence the level of delinquency in any set of twins in a similar manner. The combined role of genetics and environment. To further reinforce the position that criminals result from both genetic and environmental factors, some experiments were carried out on children living with their foster parents. These children had been adopted as infants at a time when they were least likely to have been influenced by any environmental factors. At the same time, details had been taken relating to the children's biological as well as adopting parents for later comparison. Incidentally, the findings were that the adopted children were highly likely to break the law if their biological parents had a history of criminality. As the saying goes, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. A University of Southern California psychologist, Sarnoff Mednick, together with his American and Danish associates, carried out a study based on thousands of boys who were adopted in the years ranging from 1927 to 1947. Those adopted by parents with no criminal history, but their biological parents had, proved to have higher chances of developing criminal tendencies. The reverse was found to be true in the same study, meaning that boys whose biological parents had no criminal history and were adopted by parents with criminal record tended to have comparatively lower chances of showing criminal tendencies. Similar studies carried out in Sweden confirmed these findings. This goes to show the present-day concurrence between sociologists and their criminologist counterparts, as far as genetic contribution to criminality is concerned. Intellect and temperament as factors. Although no allegations have been made pointing to the existence of genes that directly transmit criminality, genes that transmit temperament and intellect are said to be heritable, and these two human attributes can influence whether or not a person is highly likely to manifest criminal tendencies. If the genes inherited result in low intellect and bad temperament, the individual is likely to end up manifesting criminal behavior. In different studies carried out pertaining to the criminal influence intellect levels have on an individual, those living in poor settlements and were well-behaved were found to have high IQ, while those living in the same communities that often broke the law were found to have comparatively lower IQ. Experts who associate low IQ with criminal behavior reason that the low intellect probably inhibits the person's capacity to grasp the potential consequences their actions might have. Alternatively, they are incapable of understanding the importance of societal moral code, hence the apparent recklessness of their behavior. For school-going youngsters, some experts think their incapacity to score high grades in tests makes them frustrated, and what follows is resentment and anger, and ultimately delinquency. There are still those who contend that these individuals try to compensate their intellectual inadequacy that is manifested in their poor capacity to express themselves through what they are certain to be good at, which is physical force or threats, which is essentially criminal behavior. Still, it is thought that repeat criminals and high-degree offenders, even with low IQ, are usually less influenced by their influence than by their temperament. Attributes associated with the temperament of people with criminal behavior include impulsiveness, lack of emotional attachment, inclination to invite danger, and being insensitive. Experts cite infant behavior as confirmation of the heritability of temperament, considering behavior such as shyness, boldness, and fussiness, discerned in babies, sometimes endure to adulthood. Some of them, like boldness, can later on manifest as defiance or other antisocial tendencies. Lee N. Robbins, who was a Washington University socialist and expert in psychiatry up to 2007, studied over 500 individuals who, in their childhood, had been treated at St. Louis Clinic, a place that provided guidance to children during the 1920s. From her studies that covered 30 years of the individuals' lives, she found that of all the adults with no mental illness or even addiction, but who had sociopathic tendencies, they had manifested similar behavior prior to attaining the age of 18. Also, of all the male subjects with sociopathic behavior, over half of them had manifested truancy prior to the age of 11, with other deviant behavior including theft and impulsiveness without any sign of guilt. The study showed that the greater the number of delinquency symptoms a child manifested, the higher the chances the child could grow to become a sociopath in adulthood. Some studies done by the University of Colorado John Conger and University of Des Moines Wilbur Miller, both psychologists, were supportive of Dr. Robbins' findings. The two professionals studied the history of some Denver-based boys with delinquent behavior, and they found that their respective teachers had already identified their incapacity to adapt to their environment by the time they completed 3rd grade. They had also been noted to have had little regard, if any, for the feelings of their classmates, and did not appreciate the importance of taking responsibility for duties assigned to them, whether personally or as part of some group. They had also been found to have had little respect for authority. Even with evidence-based findings, the premise of genetic predisposition of criminals often becomes highly politicized. For one, some people fear that accepting that position might lead to the belief that because in some U.S. states, the proportion of incarcerated people of color is greater than that of incarcerated whites, it is proof that people of color are naturally criminals. Even fellow scientists have been known to strongly oppose the idea of scientists attempting to analyze the impact of abnormalities in chromosomes on the individual's behavior. Meanwhile, some scientists wish to study to what extent criminal behavior is hereditary, despite immense opposition. Because such studies are not meant to support the argument that criminals should be incarcerated for life, as some antagonists fear. On the contrary, they are meant to help seek compassionate means of treatment or intervention for individuals that are thus predisposed. Although treating people with criminal predisposition may prove to be complex, optimistic scientists cite alcoholism and mental illness as conditions that were previously thought to be solely environmental, but which have since been found to, at times, have some genetic predisposition. As a result, some helpful interventions have been found. From modern findings, it has become easier to help people predisposed to alcoholism and other addictions, sometimes just through counseling. Also, because of there being room for research, it has now become possible to use medication to treat people with mental illness back to health. Another complexity, besides antagonism among scientists and other influential people in society, is the idea of categorizing certain children as being potential criminals, even for purposes of study. The concept reeks of stigma. However, those who support the idea of such research argue that if stigma were to be considered a major concern when seeking solutions to societal problems, then even educational programs established specifically to cater for individuals with special needs would have to be dismantled. Chapter 2: How Psychopaths Differ from Sociopaths. It is common to find the words psychopath and sociopath used interchangeably in casual talk, in reference to an individual who appears to be perennially breaking the law, particularly in relation to violent activity. Such people are infamous for being insensitive to the feelings of others. They put their interests first, and when they offend, they often do not show guilt or remorse. As advanced studies continue in science, including social studies, professionals have sought to have psychopathy and sociopathy accepted as mental disorders, which fall under the subcategory of antisocial personality disorder, or ASPD. According to Professor Shari Sayas, a counselor who has had opportunity to work on mental health issues, over 3% of the U.S. population has some form of ASPD. Also, according to the National Institute for Health and Care Excellence, people with ASPD have heightened impulsivity and a great tendency to become angry and violent. Experts in mental health have found several similarities between the two categories of deviants, psychopaths and sociopaths, with only a few features differentiating them. Among the behaviors both of them manifest that show a pattern of blatant disregard for the law and social norms include grave violation of criminal law, deceit for selfish gain or simple pleasure, impulsiveness of action, irritability or aggression that often leads to physical attack, and disregard for safety, either for self or others. Another characteristic is failure to fulfill the normal responsibilities of an adult at home, at work, or in society, and being indifferent after causing harm to other people. Failure to behave like an adult can be exemplified by an individual neglecting to fend for his/her family, or to safeguard office property. Psychopaths live in camouflage. People considered as having antisocial personality disorder lack empathy and are also arrogant and usually contemptuous to others. One trait that makes psychopaths stand out is their incapacity to form sincere emotional attachment with other people. This inability has been found to be almost absolute, and the way these people compensate that inadequacy is by forming relationships that are merely superficial. In fact, the reason psychopaths are eager to have any relationship at all is to acquire a platform from which to cynically manipulate the people they target for personal benefit. They remain cold-hearted even as they fake concern and care for others, and often their apparently normal life is a camouflage for their devious behavior. The cold expounding of crime by the perpetrator Robert Pickerton, who in 2007 was convicted of murdering 6 women, is a classic example of how cold-hearted psychopaths are. Pickerton explained to his cellmate with haughtiness that his plan had been to murder 50 women. Ted Bundy, the infamous murderer of 30 people, by his own confession, is on record as having said in one interview that he felt sorry for people who felt guilty, and he himself never felt guilty about anything whatsoever. According to Dr. Willem H.J. Martens from the Netherlands, in addition to the other traits already mentioned, psychopaths are conceited and think too highly of themselves. He also found that they are also pathological liars, with great versatility for their criminal behavior, but they try to appear as normal as everyone else. Moreover, they make attempts at exuding charm when relating with other people, which is another of their tools of camouflage. Psychopaths are very convincing in their apparently normal appearance, both in their family and work life, while continuing to meticulously plan their evil deeds in a manner to escape detection. Sociopaths are impulsive and erratic. In comparison, sociopaths are different in that they have capacity to develop genuine attachments to people. However, the number of individuals they care about is quite small, and the relationships rarely last. Also, the lives of sociopaths have no semblance of normalcy in any sphere, unlike those of psychopaths, who are good at faking it. Instead, sociopaths are impulsive, erratic, and also prone to anger. It is usual for them to manifest sudden outbursts of violence with minimal or no provocation, and to them, their behavior is entirely justified. Whereas psychopaths scheme and manipulate, meaning their actions are premeditated, sociopaths act on the spur of the moment. Erno Soto, for example, a Manhattan resident incarcerated in 1974, was accused of killing Black and Puerto Rican boys and mutilating their genitals. And while admitting to at least one of the murders, he audaciously claimed that God had authorized him to convert small boys into small girls. These typical murders that had began in 1972 and continued up to 1973 ended once Soto was jailed. Another example of a criminal sociopath is Diane Downs, a divorced postal employee from Arizona who, in 1983, attempted to murder her 3 children, hoping to be married to Robert Knickerbocker. In her obsession to be married to Knickerbocker, Downs impulsively made up her mind to clear what she saw as her only obstacle. According to experts, sociopaths often appear nervous and also agitated, and they are rarely able to remain steady in one job. It has also been noted that a good number of sociopaths are poorly educated, unlike psychopaths who can be found in all strata of society. And the reason is probably they will have been expelled from school for misbehavior. Reports from the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry indicate that although some degree of defiance is normal in children and young adolescents, it should be a concern when such defiance is beyond that of most children, and more so if it is found to affect important aspects of a child's life, like academics, family relationships, and social life in general. According to the report, children who consistently defy authority and instead form a pattern of being uncooperative and hostile are likely to have ODD, which is a mental condition referred to as opposition defiant disorder. Since the education system has rules and regulations and a code of behavior all through, students with ODD are unable to fit in and end up having several run-ins with the administration. Ultimately, they are expelled from the school. If ODD is not treated, either professionally or through social tools, such as parental management of the condition or favorable adjustment of the social setting, such children often grow to become aggressive adults with no regard for the law. According to the organization known as CHADD, or Children and Adults with Attention Deficient/Hyperactive Disorder, ODD often occurs alongside ADHD, or Attention Deficient Hyperactive Disorder, another mental disorder. The combined disorders aggravate the situation for the affected children because their tendency to break laid-down rules and their incapacity to pay attention to counsel make a good case for expulsion from school. Once their education has been disrupted, they lose hope of ever earning a decent livelihood, a realization that can lead to frustration, anger, and more defiance. In short, such adolescents continue to live among others in society as latent criminals. CHADD has also observed that individuals from this category who end up in court are normally disadvantaged because their ADHD interferes with proper legal representation. This is because their advocates may not realize their mental condition is unstable. Their ADHD may also deprive them of any empathy from the law enforcers. The organization also notes that while in the general populace, people with ADHD constitute 4.4%, in U.S. prisons, they constitute 50% of all adults. Unfortunately, many of those with ADHD have never been formally diagnosed as such. This means that their incarceration does not include any steps towards rehabilitating them for their antisocial personality disorder. After it was noted in the UK that 20% of all prisoners with ADHD had not been diagnosed, the Ministry of Health recommended that the police, the courts, and the prisons liaise to ensure all adults accused of crime undergo a test for ADHD. The UK Minister of Health in 2009, Phil Hope, acknowledged that ADHD makes individuals more prone to committing crime, and once released from prison, they are likely to commit more crime. He reckoned that with proper diagnosis, these individuals can be marked for requisite support after discharge from prison. Such support would include helping these ex-prisoners to find gainful employment and suitable housing. It is not unusual for sociopaths to appear disturbed in the eyes of normal people, unlike psychopaths, who do their best to appear normal and innocent. The example of the Florida shooter at Parkland School is a case in point. People who knew him as a young boy confessed they had noticed his tendency to harm animals, but they did not connect his propensity to torture animals with potential to hurt human beings. Biological and environmental causes of ASPD. ASPD stands for Antisocial Personality Disorder, and based on research findings from experts in different fields, there seems to be general consensus that for people to either become psychopaths or sociopaths, the factors involved are both biological as well as environmental. Nevertheless, psychopaths seem to be more of a product of genetic predisposition than environmental influence. Some sections of their brain in charge of regulating emotions appear underdeveloped. Meanwhile, sociopaths are often found to have been exposed to abuse, sometimes physical, and other times emotional, earlier in life, or to have missed good leadership in their homes. An expert in personality types, Perpetua Neo, who supports the premise that biological predisposition has a big part to play in individuals becoming psychopaths, suggests that people should be taught how to identify any psychopathic traits they may have, and how to avoid succumbing to them. As evidence that one does not have to become a psychopath even with genetic predisposition, Neo points out that some people have genes that indicate potential for psychopathy, yet their behavior is not necessarily antisocial, owing to what she terms epigenetics. Epigenetics is about changes that result from alterations in gene expression, as opposed to changes in genetic code. Thus, decisions or actions one makes ultimately influences the expression of your genes, whether you have genetic predisposition or not. Chapter 3. How to deal with latent crime. In order to learn how to handle the problem of latent criminals, it is important to understand first what comprises latent crime. In the field of criminology, latent crime is that portion of criminality omitted in the official records of the judicial system. This means these crimes are not formally known and have no chance of reaching the stage of prosecution. In scenarios like these, crimes are committed, but for some reason they remain officially unacknowledged. Sometimes the reason for crimes not being recorded are social, and other times they emanate from weaknesses in the law enforcement and judicial systems. There are times when the criminals are too cunning to be caught, and there are also times when witnesses of crime are not willing to report the crimes. Also, in some cases, crimes are reported, but the law enforcement officers are negligent in their duty, or they are compromised by beneficiaries of the crime. Considering that one of the major factors influencing crime latency is the ability to conceal crime, it is not surprising that a big proportion of latent criminals are psychopaths. people whose lives appear normal, while they also have another hidden life of crime. Latent criminals are dangerous in that they can exist among unsuspecting neighbors and manage to collude with others who live far away to commit crime in the neighborhood. They can do the same at their workplace and be confident there is little chance, if any, for them to be questioned. There are many instances where company employees have succeeded in either defrauding their company or physically stealing its property in collusion with non-employees. But because they behave normally at the workplace, nobody can suspect them. Such are the latent criminals that are hard to catch. They are also dangerous because when investigations are taking place and they play the part of the mole on the inside, they can endanger the lives of anyone close to discovering the truth. At the same time, if they are made privy to the investigations, their main focus would be to mislead everyone involved. Mental illness and criminal latency. It has been established that a good number of criminals with mental conditions like ADHD are hardly diagnosed. Yet these are conditions that individuals suffer right from childhood. This means there are children who are said to be delinquents and handled as such, when in reality what they need in order to behave normally is a medical or personalized cognitive behavioral therapy. It is from this lot that many adolescents drop out of school or turn to alcohol and illicit drugs. This puts them in the path to becoming bigger criminals, and at this stage nobody realizes it. For this reason, they remain latent criminals within society. Alcohol and drugs as crime enhancers. In the US, some research has found that in many of the crime categories, between 63 and 83 of those arrested test positive for illicit drugs at the point of the arrest. The explanation experts have given is that once the latent criminal, meaning those predisposed to crime but not yet acknowledged as a threat, take alcohol, their inhibitions are lowered, and consequently, their underlying urges are revealed. As for the hard drugs like cocaine, they have the effect of exciting latent criminals, so that their potential for crime is unleashed. Hence, they end up committing crimes they would not otherwise have committed. While the adults land in jail, the adolescents are taken to juvenile institutions. Incidentally, for adolescents in juvenile institutions where the mode of instruction is more military than advisory, their apparent change of behavior is often out of fear, and hence temporary. That is why the rate of recidivism is high. An MIT researcher, Joseph Doyle, worked together with a colleague to study 30,000 cases of juvenile offenders in Illinois, over a span of 10 years. They found that by the time 40% of those juveniles had attained the age of 25 years, they had been incarcerated in prison as adults, having committed further crimes. In short, individuals with mental conditions, such as ADHD and ODD, may be latent criminals. Or criminals in waiting, and with the right triggers, opportunities, and environments, they will not hesitate to commit crime. Seeking to solve the problem of latent criminals without addressing the issue of mental disorders is unlikely to succeed. To underline this reality is the fact that some notorious shoplifters and pickpockets are from families that are financially stable. Hence, their urge to steal is not fueled by poverty. One of the reasons latent criminals end up progressing to actual criminals is failure to be identified. One reason being that often mental illnesses are not recognized as such. Example of possible unacknowledged sociopath. In recent times, the case of Benjamin Lundberg of Massachusetts may interest health experts and law enforcement experts alike. Although by August 2020, when Lundberg was arrested for promoting child sexual abuse, he was an adult, 39 years of age. He still lived with his mother, Christine Lundberg, who was the mayor of Springfield in Massachusetts. It should be noted that one of the traits of individuals with antisocial personality disorder is being irresponsible, especially not being able to maintain a family of their own. It should also be noted that the case on child pornography was not the first to get Lundberg arrested. It has been reported that in 2017, he served some time in jail for vandalism after he was charged with the crime of slashing tires of 27 different vehicles. Tough childhood and criminal latency. According to the FBI, violent crimes committed in the U.S. in 2018 were around 1.2 million, while those related to property theft were beyond 7 million. Obviously, there are other factors that make individuals more prone to committing crime besides mental illness. For example, considering feeding is a necessity in life, anyone who lacks food and legitimate means of acquiring it can go to extremes to find something on which to survive. In that sense, then, children and adolescents from squalid communities exist as latent criminals. In fact, research has found that adversity makes people 4 times more prone to committing crime than otherwise. In a newsletter published by Hunter College, New York Food Policy Center in 2019, the CEO of the nonprofit organization, called Hunger Free America, Joel Berg, expressed his opinion that people should not be prosecuted for stealing food to eat. This is neither the official position of law enforcement officers nor is it the law, in a country where over 37 million people have reported to have gone hungry at some time in 2018. Going by these statistics, it is clear the prevalence of latent criminals in even developed countries, such as the US, remains high. Importance of reporting crime. It is probable that if all crimes were to be reported, a pattern might form that would in due course shine some light on how to identify and deter latent criminals. However, in order to increase the incidences of crime reporting, it would require that reasons as to why victims and witnesses of crime fail to report are first identified. Some people have, for example, indicated that their reason for not reporting crime is apathy or lack of enthusiasm on the part of the police. Others have cited fear of racial discrimination as another reason. In a report covering the years from 2006 up to 2010, the Bureau of Justice Statistics, or BJS, indicated that around 52% of crime victims did not report the crime incidents to the police. Among those unreported crimes over the same period, sexual violations constituted the greatest proportion, up to 70% in some years. Meanwhile, the most reported crimes were robbery, that had 85% reported, and the theft of motor vehicles, with 65% reported. Some of the reasons given as the cause for not reporting crime are reflective of psychopathic manipulation, not just of the victims, but also of the community around. One such reason given in the report was that the cases were resolved at a personal level. This means a consensus of sorts was reached that the crime should not be reported. Such cases, together with those that were reported to different agencies other than the police, comprise 34% of the cases that do not go to the police files. It is possible the perpetrators of the crimes managed to influence the decision not to draw the attention of the police. The problem is that once they get away with minor or petty crimes, they are bound to be emboldened by their achievements and to keep committing more crime. As per the BJS report, 18% of the cases not reported to the police were those that victims felt were not important. For the victims to hold that notion, it is possible that is what they think of the law enforcement or the larger community, that they would consider such crimes inconsequential. If that is the case, it means communities and law enforcement officers need to be sensitized on the importance of taking seriously every violation of another person's rights. Once everyone is of the same mindset, Victims will feel justified to report violations. There is another category of unreported crimes whose reason for not being pursued is the victim's fear of retaliation from the perpetrators of that crime. This gives the notion that the victims have either witnessed the criminals intimidating other people, or they have personally been intimidated. For this cycle comprising violations and intimidations, and more violations to be broken, there is need for the police to be proactive in maintaining security at the community level, and to open discreet channels of communication with citizens. This way, individuals may be encouraged to report any crime they witness, without having to involve the victim or to confront the perpetrator. This would especially be helpful in cases of domestic violence, or where the children are abused by family members or friends of the family. Technology-based crimes. Often, crimes associated with technology are of a financial nature, where business employees, bank staff, and other stakeholders manage to divert money to unauthorized accounts. Sometimes, system manipulations do not lead to any money being sent out of the business, but instead money that was anticipated, for example from debtors, ends up not coming in, ending up in personal accounts. According to the Global Financial Integrity, fraud through technology has even penetrated the U.S. Medicare system, sometimes perpetrated by fraudsters using shell companies. To deter such crimes, it would help businesses to have sound internal audit systems and auditors who are adept at technology. This would make it easy to identify any abnormal activity being attempted, hence helping to either preempt crime or to catch the criminals. At the same time, lawbreakers are keen on venturing where there are glaring weaknesses in the security systems, and are hesitant where it appears hard to conceal illicit activity. In short, psychopaths can be deterred by ensuring that systems are not easy to manipulate, and that there are foolproof audit trails available. Governments can also help by insisting that company owners disclose their full identities at the time of incorporation. If such disclosure becomes a law, the shell companies mushrooming around the globe will find no room to harbor latent criminals, like those who appear respectable in their respective countries, yet they are secretly involved in corrupt and unsavory practices abroad. Other latent crimes the Global Financial Integrity has noted include financing of illegal activities, such as tree logging in protected forests, and other corrupt activities in the developing countries. These too can be minimized by revoking the secrecy behind shell companies. Another way to reduce latent crime is reporting repeat juvenile offenders. Often, families sort out the matter amongst themselves, with the parents of the offending adolescent or teenager paying for any damages the young offender has caused. While this may seem reasonable considering the age of the offender, the habit can become the enabling factor the budding criminal needs to become a hardened criminal. Letting the young offender know that law enforcement officers will have him on their radar may serve as a deterrent for future crimes, and the youth could end up reforming. After all, it has been found that psychopaths with a genetic predisposition sometimes lead normal lives, free of criminal activity, when they grow up within loving environments that are also not conducive for deviance. It is important to note that restitution alone does not erase the perpetrator's criminal tendencies, especially in cases of young offenders whose damage is compensated by their parents. The US and other countries may wish to adopt a system like the one New Zealand has to handle teenage crime. There, each offense is dealt with through a family group conference, a wide network comprising the offender's family members. Potential criminals in such a system are aware there is no room for cover-up, and that the community is bound to know of their wrongful deeds. Considering that psychopaths have a sense of self-importance and they crave to be admired. The fear of being humiliated in front of family members may discourage them from committing crime. On the overall, if families and communities were to make it difficult for a criminal to hide, law enforcement officers become more sensitive to every violation of a person's rights, and the judiciary to take every violation of an individual's rights with seriousness. Latent criminals may not thrive. And certainly, investing more in secure technology systems may discourage latent criminals from targeting companies, or it may at least make psychopathic employees abandon their criminal line of thinking. Internet anonymity fostering crime. The cyberspace gives internet users anonymity that is sometimes misused by criminals. Considering the internet traffic has already reached around 1 billion users, the potential for latent crime is significantly high. There are growing numbers of latent crimes involving child pornography and sexual molestation of children. Other psychopaths have made big business by luring children into prostitution. In 2017, for example, a professor at Emory University was caught using the internet for crime associated with child molestation. By using images of children being sexually abused from a site in far-off Switzerland. The professor from Atlanta was also abetting the crimes of other psychopaths. For using 8,000 such unlawful images, Professor Sullivan was sentenced to 6 years jail time and fined $15,000. While it was not revealed for how long the professor had been promoting child molestation over the internet, it is worth noting that the reason the latent crime of the professor was brought to an abrupt halt was the proactive action taken by the Swiss authorities, whose systems identified the downloads at the far-off university before they proceeded to close down that illegal site. The U.S. attorney at the time, John Horn, while saying the professor would remain supervised for a further 7 years after release from prison, he also emphasized that even as predators continue devising new ways of advancing child pornography, the authorities are determined to continue nabbing them and prosecuting them. What was not clarified, nevertheless, was whether the U.S. systems would have caught the offending professor if the Swiss government had not alerted them. However, it is evident the authorities in the state of Georgia are now seriously committed to curbing child abuse enabled via the internet. In early 2020, it was reported that 14 pedophile suspects using the internet to facilitate their crimes were nabbed by the authorities, among them a 44-year-old university professor by the name of Keith Walters. Among the worst latent criminals are in the category of Matthew Falder, an extremely sadistic pedophile and psychopath who was jailed for 32 years in the UK in 2018. He was highly educated, up to PhD level, and while his professors considered him exceptionally brilliant, he had led a life of crime, where for several years he had not only committed crime himself, but had blackmailed other people into doing it. These examples go to show that curbing latent internet crime calls for serious effort by every organization and every country, because criminals tend to move their operations where either regulation is non-existent or vigilance is minimal. There is another category of internet-based latent criminals who promise to secure jobs for unsuspecting individuals. These ones target people within their own countries or abroad, and once these targets have fallen for the lies, the criminals disappear within the facilitation fee and other monies paid. Some of the latent crimes enabled by the anonymity of the internet are of global concern, and they include internationally organized crime. Some of these crimes involve human trafficking, while others involve terrorism and some form of espionage. There have been many instances where individuals have been lured into terrorism over the internet. A good example is that of 5 American men from Virginia who were caught and jailed in Pakistan, having been recruited over the internet to join a terrorist training organization known as Jaish-e-Mohammed. Although some countries are keen on warning parents of the dangers of the internet to children, and some software developers have made attempts at installing restrictive protocols. The most effective way might just be harmonization of legislation at the international level. That way, instead of putting a few suspects under the radar of the Interpol, there would be continuous monitoring of illegal activity by all legitimate authorities, irrespective of where the crime sites are geographically hosted. If chances of being caught become very high and punitive measures very stingent, many latent criminals might just give up on crime. Chapter 4. The Role of Religion, Laws, and Institutions in Controlling Base Urges in Humans. Among the factors that lead to criminality is the presence of base urges in every human being, which have only been tamed over the years by civilization and religion. People have base instincts, like loyalty to one's tribe, which in the past have led to intertribal wars for the pettiest of reasons. For the nomadic tribes of the world, one tribe might have initiated war just because a few heads of cattle had strayed to pastures another tribe deemed its territory. People also have natural greed, the kind that made emperors in the early days fight neighboring communities in order to expand their territories, or European colonists to partition Africa among themselves, while there were indigenous people already living on the continent. Unfortunately, depriving other people of their property is not the only crime that emanates from greed. Often, acts of harassment and murder are perpetrated in the process. Another base instinct humans have is the urge to reproduce, so as to preserve the human species, tribe, or race. There has always been the feeling among humans that there is power in numbers. The same notion echoed in modern politics. Hence, a bigger tribe or community traditionally felt more secure than a smaller one. Denial is another base human instinct. When people are faced with an event or state that has a possibility of dire consequences, such as a serious illness, they are tempted to go into denial mode. The reason for this is that they do not want fear to ruin the peace they have at the moment. While the urge of denial is a coping mechanism for many people, other urges, like greed, are simply tools of dominance. In some cases, like where a person in power continues to deprive his or her subjects for their personal gain, such greed portrays psychopathic tendencies. The effect of human base instincts on modern life. Whereas in ancient days, people's base instincts came in handy in protecting them and their property, in modern society, they seem to be the very cause of disharmony among individuals and communities. They particularly seem to motivate individuals to engage in antisocial activities. This observation was made by Professor Eric R. Payanka, who is associated with the University of Texas. Economic and social-driven greed. The economy and social success people long for in modern-day society encourages continuity of the base instinct of greed. This is the same kind of greed that led one African tribe to push another further away from its territory, or the Europeans to drive Native Americans from their original settlements a long time ago. Research studies indicate that the number of indigenous people killed by the Europeans across South and Central America, as well as North America, over a time span of 100 years, totals 56 million. In the present day, there is increased pressure to succeed, both at individual and organizational level, and this has enhanced and institutionalized greed. Today's financial fraudster does not want to assimilate any fear of punishment, though fear is a natural human instinct, because doing so would mean acknowledging the reality of having to face consequences. Such appreciation would then deter him/her from becoming rich and famous fast as desired. A good example of modern-day greed is the scandalous case of Enron Corporation, which, in a bid to reflect economic success, manipulated its accounts records and concealed fraudulent transactions in the years preceding 2001. Eventually, its shares, whose market value was over $90 in mid-2000, plummeted to 26 cents by December 2001 when the company filed for bankruptcy. The base urge of greed had led the top executives at the company, led by Chairman Kenneth Lay, to commit economic crimes against the shareholders. They violated the shareholders' right to honesty, caused them massive economic losses, and consequently hurt their socio-economic life as well. Another good example is that of Bernie Lawrence Madoff, the investment advisor turned fraudster, who cheated around 5,000 people out of their money. Had he embraced the fear of being caught, fined, and imprisoned, he would not have proceeded to con his victims of their savings. This, by extension, means he would not have fulfilled his wish of becoming a multi-billionaire. Madoff's criminal actions subsequently led to more crime, as some of his victims ended up committing suicide. One of them was a Frenchman known as Thierry M. Villehouchet, whose company, AA Group, had suffered a $1.5 billion loss from Madoff's fraudulent scheme. Madoff's denial of fear, a basic human instinct, earned him about $65 billion in fraudulent gains. This is no indication that crime pays, but rather an explanation of what drives criminals to act as they do. In fact, Bernie Madoff was sentenced to jail time of 150 years in 2009. In the courtroom where he presented a pitiful sight, there were no close family members, but many victims, some of who dubbed him a psychopath. His February 2020 appeal for early release on grounds of illness failed. This is an indication that the institution of the judiciary is bent on curtailing crime, through upholding the stringent measures provided by the law. Denial and procreation for political and economic gain. People who do not control their base instinct for procreation may be prone to committing rape. For those who do not commit crimes of sexual harassment, they join the larger population that does not wish to curtail childbirth for the sake of protecting the earth and its resources. As a consequence, the scramble for the scarce resources becomes greater, and more criminals are born out of squalor. Rape increases in crowded neighborhoods, and theft increases as people try to survive. The same greed and obsession with economic success applies to the desire for political success as well. Aspiring leaders and their incumbents are ready to deny the reality that their countries have scarce resources, just to mislead the masses and appear to be in full control. If the incumbent is trying to protect forests, for example, his/her competition tries to portray that as denying the masses use of resources that are rightfully theirs. Sometimes the incumbent may allow for liberal felling of trees for use as fuel and building material, just to pacify the populace and remain politically popular. This failure to portray facts as they are serves to perpetuate poverty, and in due course, to aggravate crime. For the issue of procreation, there are also many tribes and races that see procreation as the way forward to enhance their potential for political dominance. This is particularly evident in African countries, where even democratic leaders have strongholds in their geographical areas of birth, and where it is almost normal for leaders to appoint relatives and fellow tribesmen to positions of authority. Meanwhile, as populations continue to increase exponentially, natural and other resources become overstretched, and people are tempted to grab the little within reach. That is one trend that has led to the apparent normalization of theft and fraud in government and private institutions. Professor Pyanka notes that the population occupying the Earth, which the UN estimates to be 7.8 billion as at September 2020, cannot continue to be supported by the resources available, which are certainly finite. According to the professor, if human beings continue living in denial with respect to the issue of population growth, their quality of life is bound to be compromised. As has already been pointed out, deterioration of standards of living encourages criminal activities. Professor Pyanka recommends that people become proactive in controlling the base urges they have brought with them from the traditional setup. Whether it is the instinct of denial, greed, loyalty to tribe, or the inclination to procreate, these human instincts are dangerous if not controlled. Religion, laws, and institutions are seen to be suitable avenues through which human beings can control their basic urges. Religion has particularly been found to help in preventing the prevalence or escalation of crime in communities. Although there is not much empirical data to that effect, many scholars and religious leaders concur that the sense of communal existence created by religion is a positive tool in curbing crime. In a study carried out at Montclair State University in New Jersey, USA, which involved Professors Christopher Salvatore and Gabriel Rubin, in addition to religion cultivating a sense of responsibility to the community, it has a code of conduct that serves effectively to keep adolescents and young adults away from crime. Prevalence of crime among emerging adults. There is credible data to show there is a high rate of crime-related arrests among the young people commonly referred to as emerging adults. Those that have outgrown adolescence but are yet to be considered adults. Some of them may have reached the chronological age of adulthood, but they are still considered emerging adults because they are still dependent on their parents or guardians. Some 2016 statistics from UCR, or Uniform Crime Report, covering different demographics indicate that there were more arrests of individuals 18 to 25 years of age for crimes of violence and non-violence alike, compared to other demographics. For example, as per the same 2016 UCR, 15-year-olds arrested for committing violent crimes were 7,860 in number, while the number of 20-year-olds arrested within the same period for similar crimes was 14,040. With regards to non-violent crimes that involved property, the arrests of 15-year-olds numbered 29,385, while those of 20-year-olds numbered 37,463. According to Professor Salvatore and other scholars, another category of crime prevalent among the emerging adults is abuse of prescription drugs and use of illicit drugs. The reason cited for this antisocial behavior is a search for identity. After adolescence, young individuals are not sure the kind of image they want to portray, and so they often do things on a trial basis. In the process of experimenting in their diverse ways, some of the things they pursue are of a criminal nature. Another reason is that young people today are finding a social system where traditional norms have been interfered with. The societal bonds that used to deter young adults from straying into a life of crime no longer exist. In some societies, there were activities and rituals that corresponded to climactic seasons, like communal harvesting that was routinely followed by communal partying and age-appropriate dances. Examples of delayed milestones and reasons. Milestones that traditionally gave young people a sense of belonging and responsibility have been dismantled by modern life. In the meantime, no new milestones have been established in their place, and where they exist, they do not play the exact role the traditional milestones did. In some cases, some crucial milestones have been delayed, consequently delaying maturity and individual sense of responsibility. For example, Professor Karen B. Guzzo, who is a demographer and an expert in sociology, reckons the fertility rates seen as dropping in the U.S. are not as plain as they appear. Instead, they represent a delayed milestone. Guzzo, who is associated with Bowling Green State University, notes that although the rate of birth among teenagers fell by 7% in 2017/2018, as per CDC statistics, birth rate for females in the bracket of 30 to 34 years of age remained constant. In the meantime, birth rate among women aged over 34 all through to early 40s rose a little bit, with those in their late 30s recording a 1% increase, and those in their early 40s recording a 2% increase. Hence, the professor did not find it a concern that the overall U.S. population increase was a mere 0.62% in that period. This goes to emphasize the point that the milestone of giving birth has been pushed by many young adults to a later age, often to the 40s. Obviously, the more responsibility is postponed, the more opportunity individuals have to engage in antisocial activities. One nonprofit organization has noted that in a bid to grow careers and become financially stable, many Americans are ignoring traditional milestones that were crucial to the maturity of individuals. That organization is known as Life Happens. In its year 2020 study dubbed The New American Milestones, the organization noted that 61% of Americans are postponing milestones that mark their traditional stages in life. Meanwhile, they seek to pursue activities that seem to guarantee them financial security. Among the delayed milestones are marriage, giving birth, and building a retirement fund. The proportions of U.S. population that have delayed these traditional milestones are 53, 50, and 54% respectively. The success in financial stability confirms the trajectory of the renewed focus, as 74% of those individuals end up being financially stronger than their counterparts who adhered to traditional milestones. This tendency to delay milestones has been found to cause an increase in the demographic of emerging adults, who have also adopted the notoriety of crime and rates that used to be observed in teenagers. In short, the delayed milestones, while allowing young adults time to build financial wealth, does not exonerate them from delinquency. For an individual who graduates with a bachelor's degree, for instance, and in a bid to raise his/her chances of clinching a big job, decides to pursue a master's degree. By the time he/she is through with her internship program, he/she may be 30 years old. Considering people the same age who do not go so far in their studies may already be working, this individual may feel the pressure to outshine them. Hence, he/she may not be in a hurry to start a family. Instead, his/her focus is likely to be on how to find work and build a financial empire fast. The pressure to justify his/her long pursuit for education may be great. With haste to become rich, such an individual could be tempted to seek unorthodox means that may involve committing fraud. The education level of such individuals usually puts them in positions of authority, and that makes it easy for them to commit fraud if they so wish. Incidentally, if the first attempt at fraud is successful, the urge of greed often takes over and the trend continues. After all, the family bond and responsibility that keeps individuals in check is not present here. According to study findings published in the National Criminal Justice Reference Service, NCJRS, although individuals in poverty sometimes have the urge to commit criminal acts like theft just to survive, the urge does not necessarily cease when they are out of poverty. Once individuals get into positions of power and they have a taste of wealth, greed becomes a motivation for crime. In short, greed can be overwhelming when a person with power also has the opportunity to commit crime, in this instance, to steal. And this is exactly the situation with an emerging adults who prioritize the pursuit for education over income earning and starting a family. NCJRS terms situations of power and opportunity that the young adults find themselves in new kinds of crime opportunities. These emerging adults do not realize that wealth, as explained by one personal finance expert, is not in itself a destination. This issue of young educated adults falling into crime should be understood from the premise that having a good financial base does not exonerate a person from becoming vulnerable. It is a reality that many young graduates are in haste to catch up building life after spending a lot of time in the education system, and that can tempt them to follow shortcuts, like using fraudulent means. It is also true that having close family ties or other tight social ties makes one reconsider before doing something of a criminal nature. The young educated adults are, for most part, single, and they are not part of any strong social affiliation or grouping. A young individual who has the tools to commit crime, like high computer literacy that would help in hacking systems, is one example of highly educated people who, without societal or other safeguards, can be vulnerable. When trying to understand the prevalence of crime among emerging adults, it is good to appreciate that there is more to success and good behavior than a good education. This reality has been expressed in a newsletter published in Inc. titled Harvard MBAs Keep Going to Prison. Nevertheless, these observations are not meant to undermine the importance of education, because in many areas of the world, crime rate has generally been found to drop as literacy levels rise. Religion as a tool for crime deterrence. French sociologist Émile Durkheim is considered to have pioneered the analysis of religion as an influencing tool in society. The stance of this scholar, who, together with Karl Marx, alongside Max Weber, is credited with being the fathers of modern sociology, is that religion deals with matters of interest to the community. He finds it a fit tool to enhance social cohesion, so that people relate and work well with one another. He also considers religion fit to promote social control, so that people get to behave in a socially acceptable manner with consistency. To Durkheim, religion helps people to find sense in life even in times of tragedy or during difficult transition phases in life. Durkheim also considers the society to have a common mindset, from where religion and morals emanate. Essentially, therefore, the very existence of a society enables religion to thrive, and conversely, religion helps society to remain intact and stable. Scholars like Professor Salis Wright of Boston College of Social Work have relied on credible data that includes the one from UCR to establish how religion can be used to mitigate the propensity for individuals to fall into crime as they approach adulthood. The reason they think religion can help is that many American homes and communities are religious. And as has already been noted, religion has a way of keeping young people away from crime. Other scholars have found that religious young adults have less probability of being involved in substance abuse. Even Professor Salis Wright in his publications has indicated that young individuals who are religious are less likely to be involved in acts of violence. In their 2001 publication, scholars Colin Byer and Bradley Wright of the University of Connecticut have acknowledged the positive role religion plays in keeping young people from crime. They also reckon that the level of one's religious involvement matters, so that those whose participation in matters of religion is serious often manifest minimal antisocial behavior. In other words, if adolescents and emerging adults can lead a religious lifestyle, they are less likely to stray into a life of crime or to be drawn into performing acts of a criminal nature. Professor J.G. Johnson, who has been associated with the New York State Psychiatric Institute, together with some other scholars, analyzed some data in 2000 that came from a survey involving individuals aged 11 to 17 years. Their aim was to establish the extent to which religion neutralizes the negative effects of environmental context occasioned by unfavorable neighborhoods. They wanted to find out how religion can adjust the negative trajectory created for young people by the things that go on around them to ensure they remain clear of crime. They concluded that religion is a positive influence to young people below the age of 17 years, even those who live in unsavory neighborhoods. The big challenge remains how religion can serve as a deterrent to crime within the demographic of emerging adults, those above 17 years of age. According to Professor Christopher Salvatore and other scholars, one of the reasons for this challenge is that, unlike in the traditional setup, where milestones were clearly defined, modern lifestyle has distorted the maturation phases and milestones marking a young person's life. In this regard, the phase from adolescence to adulthood has become longer, as individuals take a longer time within the education system. This has, in turn, prolonged the phase between teenage and adulthood, and consequently delayed milestones that are important to society, such as marriage. In fact, while initially scholars considered emerging adulthood to have been extended by modernity to 25 years of age, scholars like Salvatore now consider that age to have been extended further to around 30 years of age or over. Professor Salvatore's scholarly work of 2018 explains that some of the antisocial behavior associated with emerging adults includes increased incidences of risky behavior, such as binging on alcohol and engaging in unsafe sex. Salvatore, in his findings, was in concurrence with scholars who, in earlier years, had recognized the risky behavior this demographic was involved in, particularly dangerous driving and use of illicit substances. He has also explained in a 2017 publication that emerging adults are prone to committing small crimes that do not involve violence. He and other scholars believe that religion can influence these emerging adults in a manner to refrain them from adopting dangerous behavior. According to Professor William Brainbridge, who is well known for his work in sociology of religion, traditionally organized religions have been relied upon to help individuals bond with other family members. They have also been found to help individuals bond with other members of their community and society in general. Through religion, members within all ages brackets get to develop morals and to maintain them, and these morals are aligned with the goals of the society. The religious bond, meanwhile, created, helps to keep families as well as communities intact, aided by the beliefs they hold in common and the rituals they undertake communally. In addition, the bond provides the community with some moral compass that helps determine when the behavior of an individual or group is acceptable and when it is not. In this respect, the religious bond serves as a convenient internal control system, as far as social behavior is concerned. This system helps individuals, families, and other social units to self-regulate and to keep away from antisocial activities that include crime. During an interview in 2013, a religious scholar, Tariq Mahmoud, emphasized that the reason Muslim families send children for religious sessions of madrasa is to have them taught morals and discipline in addition to cultural values. This goes to show that reliance on religion for moral upkeep is a widely accepted concept. Scholars have established that religious institutions like churches, temples, mosques, and synagogues offer young people some norms that guide them in creating relationships with each other. Many are in concurrence that religion has capacity to mold adolescents as well as emerging adults into respecting societal norms. In arriving at this conclusion, they have taken into account some observation that the more involved individuals are in religious affairs, the more likely they are to develop meaningful social networks. Considering these social networks respect the norms set by religion, the individuals involved feel a sense of duty to stay clear of bad behavior. This argument was expressed by Professor Michael Gottfredson, an expert in criminology, in a publication co-authored with Travis Hirschi in 1990. Hence, the general consensus among scholars, religious leaders, and criminologists is that religion is helpful in mitigating delinquency, use of illicit substances, and antisocial behavior in general among members of the society. Role of law and institutions in curbing crime. Law has, for a long time, been seen as a deterrent for crime, whether that law is laid down directly by the government or its agencies. In a discussion on the safety of women organized by the Hindustan Times in 2013, the first IPS or Indian Police Service woman officer in India, Kiran Bedi, indicated that crime against women is so prevalent that she decided to join the police force just to be able to live with dignity and in a manner that enabled her to enjoy her civil rights. Bedi, who had by this time served in the force for 35 years, implied that as far as women in the country were concerned, their rights were infringed at will, and only as a law enforcement officer could she feel safe. The Nirbhaya case. In fact, the committee that was formed soon after the brutal rape and murder of 23-year-old Jyoti Singh in South Delhi towards the end of 2012 concluded that attacks on women continued to be perpetuated in the country because the government and the police had failed to play the role of protection of its citizens and law enforcement. Following recommendations of the committee that had received around 80,000 suggestions, many relevant laws were enacted through the Criminal Law Amendment Ordinance of 2013, and 6 additional courts were established to be able to fast-track cases associated with rape. This means the committee of experts led by Justice J.S. Verma believed that good laws do have capacity to curtail crime. In fact, even long before 5 of the involved criminals were sentenced to death, Bedi observed that the situation in the country had changed for the better. The noted improvement had occurred following the legal changes instituted in the aftermath of the unfortunate incident of Nirbhaya. Hence, even the very knowledge that there are stringent laws in place seems to discourage potential criminals. The barbaric attack on Jyoti Singh, who had been given the name Nirbhaya during the court process in order to have her identity concealed, and whose 6th attacker had apparently committed suicide in prison, led to revolutionizing of the criminal judicial system with particular focus on protection of women. The Massachusetts Bridges Case. A 1785 commercial agreement between the Charles River Bridge Company and the U.S. state of Massachusetts was rendered inconsequential as far as business competition was concerned. The company had constructed a bridge that connected Boston to Cambridge with the agreement that it would collect toll fees to cover its costs during the life of its charter. However, its attempt to block another company from constructing a different bridge that would introduce business competition was overruled by the Supreme Court in 1828. The court held that not only had the state not given Charles River Bridge monopoly over bridge construction in the state, but it was imperative that the welfare of the residents be given priority over other considerations. According to the Supreme Court, the priority of the government as an institution is to enhance the society's happiness and success. And certainly, the judicial system ensures the laws enacted by government are well implemented for the welfare of society. While this particular case was not of a criminal nature, it serves to show that the law can be used to deter any actions with potential to interfere with the welfare of individuals and communities. Female genital mutilation, FGM, in the U.S. While good laws protect individuals and communities, bad laws leave them vulnerable to dangerous experiences. In 1996, when the U.S. Congress enacted a law to ban female genital mutilation, or FGM, hundreds of females across the country who were at risk of this callous act felt protected. The potential victims, who by 2016 exceeded 500,000 going by CDC statistics, were confident the penalty for breaking the law that included a fine or 5-year imprisonment would be a deterrent. However, the 2018 case that pitted the U.S. government against Jumana Nagarwala and other defendants, 4 of them in the state of Michigan, had the initial law overturned by Judge Bernard A. Friedman, leaving the victims without recourse. The argument from the defendants' lawyers, which the judge upheld, was that Congress had no mandate to make federal laws, and that the law relied upon could only have been honored if it had been enacted by the state. At that point, it meant that perpetrators of FGM could continue hurting girls and women, knowing they could not be punished for it. Since lawmakers and society at large recognize the role of laws in protecting individuals against torture and other violations, individual states have since become proactive in legislating against FGM. Congress has also appealed the ruling by Judge Friedman. From 27 states that had relevant laws in place in 2018, the numbers rose to 35 by 2019, after the infamous ruling by Judge Friedman. By then, additional states had already begun the process by initiating relevant bills, and by 2020, the number of states with such laws had risen to around 40. The punishment these states have set for perpetrators of FGM is incarceration that can extend up to 35 years or even a lifetime, in addition to a fine that can go up to $25,000 depending on the state. This underlines the reality that the more stringent the law, the more of a deterrent it is considered to be. Criminality of self-harm. Suicide is deemed criminal in most of the U.S. states, specifically those that still maintain the common law inherited by the British colonists. However, since the dead cannot be prosecuted, those who face the law are the ones that attempt suicide but survive. One of the states that still maintain the said law is Maryland. Nevertheless, the opinion of the American public towards people who attempt suicide has changed drastically over the years. And today, there is consensus that suicide or attempted suicide should not be criminalized. The reality on the ground is making lawmakers rethink the handling of suicide cases, with a view to reducing its prevalence. NCHS 2018 data indicated that the rate of suicide in the years ranging 1999 to 2017 rose to 33%, with the highest rates being from 2006 onwards. Moreover, while suicide ranks 10th in the U.S. as the cause of death among adolescents and emerging adults, it is ranked second. NCHS stands for National Center for Health Statistics, and it falls under the Center for Disease Control. The American Psychological Association observed in a 2019 feature that there is need to find out how other countries have managed to maintain much lower rates of suicide in comparison to the U.S. It is even more worrying to know that there are many more people, almost 400,000 in 2008, who inflict injuries on themselves with a wish to die, but end up surviving. Yet medical experts have found a correlation between suicide and depression, as well as other health issues of a mental nature. It has also been noted that a third of people who commit suicide will have taken alcohol immediately before, and a fifth will have taken opiates. This then provides a link between suicide and substance abuse, which is a common antisocial behavior. As far as medical professionals are concerned, people who commit suicide do not necessarily wish to stop living. Their actions are attempt at finding relief for the serious psychological pain they are experiencing at the time. Durkheim categorized suicide into 4 types: egoistic, altruistic, anomic, and fatalistic. His distinctions were based on the relationship the perpetrator had with the society within which he/she lived. According to Durkheim, an individual loses the wish to live if he feels there is no place for him in society. At such times, the person perceives himself as socially isolated and ultimately attempts to remove him/herself from that society through suicide. Durkheim considers the person involved as being self-centered, hence categorizing this self-destruction as egoistic suicide. As for altruistic suicide, the individual is so intertwined with society that he/she feels obliged to carry out all the norms of that society. Such an individual does not question even the most bizarre of customs, as exemplified by the Indian sati custom, or sati. In the olden days, when a man died and was being cremated, according to Hindu custom, his widow would jump into the pyre and get herself burnt as well. Her action would signify courage in times of grief, and she would be considered a heroine. Unfortunately, over time, this practice became less optional and more forced, which means it shifted from being a suicidal act to being murder. Today, that custom has been outlawed in the country. Anomic suicide is carried out following an individual's social destabilization, either for the good or for the bad. It happens mostly when the person's social equilibrium has been drastically shaken. Suitable examples include bankruptcy. A person who has been doing well financially and is suddenly unable to meet his/her financial obligations can feel socially destabilized, and that can lead to the immense urge to commit suicide. In anomic suicide, suddenness of change in one's social status is the central catalyst. Fatalistic suicide occurs in societies where there is overregulation, or where an individual feels he/she has been rendered helpless by his/her status. A case where a slave commits suicide is an appropriate example of fatalistic suicide. Another suitable example is where a woman who is barren commits suicide. Religious institutions as tools to mitigate suicide. As far as Durkheim is concerned, religious institutions can mitigate some of the mentioned types of suicide, like the egoistic suicide. He observes that individuals who participate in activities and rituals sponsored by religious institutions are not vulnerable to egoistic suicide. This reasoning falls under Durkheim's social integration theory, which holds that an individual is a moral being to the extent he/she is a social being. According to this theory, there is a community consciousness that is based on the norms, values, and beliefs that all the members share, and it gives them a common view of the world. It also directs how they respond to different worldly happenings and experiences. This fundamentally means that the behavior of an individual is guided by the expectations of the community, what can be termed its moral code. Hence, Durkheim sees religious institutions as not only fit for normalization of a person's life, but also one of integration. These institutions offer activities and responsibilities that occupy an individual from the self and give him/her a sense of communion with the other religious members. Thus, self-centeredness is eliminated, and chances of suicidal thoughts are minimized. At the same time, thoughts of a criminal nature or deviance have no room in the minds of such individuals. Chapter 5. The Evil of Manipulation. Whether an individual has criminal intentions or simply has the best urge to claim superiority over others, there are some signs that are prevalent when manipulation is taking place. Ordinarily, manipulation is geared towards giving the perpetrator undue advantage over his/her target. Manipulation is about influencing someone in an indirect manner, but when you want people to change for the better, the tendency is to persuade them, not to manipulate them. Persuasion is part of what goes on in social circles, like friends trying to get others to be part of a venture that they believe will benefit all of them. If one of the friends is unduly averse to risk and the others believe in the potential success of the project, they can try to highlight the potential benefits of the project. That way, the individual can see that the risk involved is minimal compared to those benefits. Good friends influence one another in ways that make the society better, but bad friends lead others astray and make them a nuisance to society. In short, good friends persuade, while bad ones manipulate. Selfish manipulation and its forms. By the time manipulation becomes an issue to be addressed, its negative effect will have been felt, where one party is being subjected to undue influence. According to Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, the wrongfulness encompassed in manipulation is the harm the targets are caused. When there is manipulation in a social or professional relationship, the target is in many cases either subordinated or abused. In a business setup, the victim of manipulation might end up entering into a contract that is exploitative to him/her, without a convenient exit clause. Even in a political setup, manipulation can be terrible for the targets. For example, in countries where manipulation of a political nature is systemic, democratic structures are gradually dismantled. And as the democratic institutions become unstable, the risk of tyrannical leadership being entrenched becomes real. Psychological and emotional aspects of manipulation. According to one therapist based in the state of California, USA, Sherry Steins, manipulation is an unhealthy strategy of a psychological and emotional nature, which some people use because they do not want to make an outright request for the thing they desire. Steins, whose line of specialization is toxic relationships and outright abuse, says that whenever people attempt to manipulate others, their real intention is to control them. Fear, sense of guilt, and obligation. One red flag that someone may be trying to manipulate you is the feeling of pressure. You wish the person would desist from making the request or suggestion he/she is making, yet you are not bold enough to say so. In such times, it is advisable to pause and analyze the entire situation you are in, taking into account what your initial wish had been before you began feeling the pressure. In addition to the feeling of being pressured and controlled, another red flag is second-guessing yourself. If you find that the regularity with which you are questioning your decision-making abilities is higher than you are used to, there is a chance you are under some manipulation. Often, when someone is manipulating you, you are likely to sense some discomfort, and at this point, you need to slow down and review the ongoing topic or event. However, some people are so subtle in their manipulation that it is not easy to identify it in its early stages. For example, a persistent salesperson may not come across as an obvious manipulator. Yet he/she is trying to manipulate you by showing you the best sides of his/her product or service, with a view to influencing you to pay for it. In the meantime, some spouses are manipulative to a level that enters the realm of emotional abuse. There are 3 emotions Stein cites as being common when an individual is going through manipulation, and these are fear, a sense of obligation, and also guilt. Deep down, you are aware you do not want to do something, yet the other person makes you feel as if you are obliged to do it. At the same time, if you are able to reason out and come to the conclusion you are under no obligation to go through with the deed, you still feel guilty about not doing it. Other times, you may even be afraid there may be unfavorable consequences if you do not oblige. If you ever have these feelings, it is fair to conclude you are being coerced. Sherry Stein says there are normally 2 types of manipulators, one being a bully and the other one who plays victim. The bully tries to influence you into doing something by instilling fear into you, or by using intimidation or threats or outright aggression. The victim, on the other hand, acts as if your failure to do what he/she wants, or to act how he/she wants you to, is meant to hurt him/her, hence making you feel guilty of causing him/her harm. As such, it is important to distinguish between genuine hurt or dramatized hurt that is meant to manipulate you. According to Steins, one mistake people make when they are targeted by manipulators playing victim is sympathize with them as if they were genuine victims. They then try to help out those manipulators just to rid themselves of the feeling of guilt. This means, instead of being responsible for their own happiness, these targets of manipulation end up taking responsibility for the happiness of their manipulators. Second-guessing yourself. If you find yourself second-guessing yourself every time you have a discussion with a particular individual, do some assessment and see if the person is manipulative to you. People out to manipulate you usually twist your words to suit their message, including what they want other people to think about you. If you are an event planner, for example, and the manipulator is jealous of you taking up a particular job, he/she may ask you a random question regarding your weekend, like if you intend to invite someone over for the weekend. And if you say yes, the individual delivers a message to your prospective business partners that you would not be available to take up their job. Certainly, failure to have the business deal sealed is likely to disappoint you. But the manipulator would pretend he was doing you a favor since he knew you would be busy. Yet he knows that the question he/she had posed to you was not the context of work or business. The person may be so convincing that you end up believing you are the one who withheld crucial information that led to you failing to receive the business offer. This is notwithstanding the fact that the person who volunteered the erroneous information was not your business agent or your assistant, and not someone that you had involved in your business negotiations. Steins opines that the same kind of people are known to hijack a conversation you had initiated, and driving it in some direction you did not intend, and then attributing any negative results to you. One characteristic of manipulators, according to Stein, is their failure to acknowledge responsibility and their tendency to blame others. Other experts have cited lies and making of excuses as big signs the individual might be engaging in manipulation. Manipulators are also said to be double-faced, with a tendency to wear the face that suits them at any one time. Besides lying and twisting the truth, they are also strategic in the information they disclose to their targets, often withholding important information that would help their victim form enlightened decisions. Often, when a manipulator is not exaggerating an issue, he/she is likely to be understating it. Favors with strings attached. Anyone doing something for you, dependent on you fulfilling their wish, is being manipulative. For instance, when a bank promises to give you a bigger loan if you repay the smaller one quickly, it is a way to influence you into ignoring other financial obligations you may have in favor of the bank loan. At an individual level, someone may do something good for you, on condition you do him/her a favor. But in case you simply thank the person, without taking it upon yourself to do something out of reciprocity, the person condemns you as being ungrateful. Stein says there are people like those that everyone around considers nice, but are simply manipulative. It needs to be acknowledged that it is normal for people to wish to reciprocate good deeds. But when the initial deed is done just to bait reciprocity, it is sheer manipulation. Jay Olson, a scholar at McGill University, says there are individuals who exploit the norms of reciprocity in manipulating others. He points out that manipulators do good deeds with reciprocity in mind, and not from the goodness of their hearts. And so, that is an abuse of the noble norm of reciprocity. Requests in two extremes. According to Olson, manipulators often attempt one of two methods, either of them involving extremes. They may decide to ask a favor that looks so small that it would appear odd for you to refuse, something that you are likely to view as inconsequential to your status or life in general. Once you concede to that request, a second one quickly follows, which is of a bigger magnitude. Someone may, for example, ask you, "Our salaries have been delayed. Would you mind lending me $1,000? In your empathy, you may hasten to accept. What follows is the part that may get you thinking about what you have gotten yourself into. No sooner does the person say, "Thank you," Then he/she tells you, "I hope you don't mind, even if it takes me some months to pay you back the money. Our company has been experiencing financial difficulties." In such an instance, you may be torn between withdrawing the offer to avoid messing up your budget, something that you feel guilty about, and conceding to the second offer as well, and feeling bad about your decision because you will have created a financial problem for yourself. The other method of extremes has the manipulator making a massive request, and when you easily say it is beyond your capacity, the individual asks for something that is of less magnitude. Even if the second request is significant, the fact that it is below the first asking makes you feel like you have no justification to say no. Olson equates the first technique to the manipulator just managing to put his/her foot in your door, believing that pushing his/her way in after that will be easy. As for the second technique, he equates it to somebody putting his/her face in your doorway just as you get to shut the door, because then it appears like you have rudely slammed the door in their face. This is intended to elicit in you a feeling of guilt on noticing the person's face, in which case you are likely to open the door a bit and feel obliged to pay attention to what this person wants. The second method is like getting you to do the person a favor as a way of pacifying him/her. The second method is common with people who hawk merchandise or those who offer contractual work. One might name an exorbitant figure as the price, and when you express your shock, they tell you there is room for a little negotiation. From the extremely high figure, a little reduction may seem acceptable to you, especially if you had not done any due diligence on the particular commodity or job. Meanwhile, the prevailing market price may be significantly lower. Situations to avoid. Keeping in mind that whatever manipulators do is set to benefit them at your disadvantage, it is important to know how to behave to avoid making yourself vulnerable. Among the best ways is to know the situations that give the manipulator an edge against you. Meeting on unfamiliar grounds. A manipulator prefers to meet you on grounds familiar to him/her, but which are new to you. A new environment can be somewhat disorienting, if not completely intimidating, and a manipulator can easily get his/her way in such an environment. Such is actually an ideal environment for an unscrupulous individual to dominate and control you. For this reason, it is advisable to avoid meeting in places that can be termed the person's territory, like his/her office, home, or even vehicle. In fact, it is best that you suggest the meeting location, so that you choose a venue that you are comfortable with. Experts suggest you do not give a potential manipulator what can be termed home advantage. Engaging first. Manipulators have a tendency to use what you say as fodder for their manipulation. For that reason, they may prod you to express yourself first. They get to learn your thinking, assessing how much you know regarding the issue of their interest, and what your attitude is towards it, and then proceeding to capitalize on the loopholes and the weaknesses they have identified. Sometimes they may get you talking about posing general questions that are followed by others that are more probing. Their plan is to learn what they can and use it to fulfill their hidden agenda. This behavior is common with sellers of poor quality merchandise that is nevertheless overpriced. It is also prevalent with employees eyeing promotions where other colleagues are better qualified. They may pretend to be interested in the colleagues' plans for career advancement, but then use what they learn to their own advantage. Statistical bombardment. There are some individuals who try to gain advantage over others from facts that they know, and others do not. And it can be intimidating to listen to such people incessantly quoting statistics. Non-manipulative people normally mention they have the statistics and proceed to make their point, without bombarding the other person with them. On the contrary, it is the intention of the manipulative individual to do what is termed intellectual bullying by purporting to be extra knowledgeable in the area under discussion. The reality is that you have no way of ascertaining the veracity of the data provided, and your manipulator would prefer that you believe he/she is an expert. For this reason, you would be better off excusing yourself out of the discussion, probably choosing to have it postponed to a later date. For example, if you are a company CEO or a business owner faced with a manipulator of this kind, you can reschedule the discussion, and before that date, you identify someone better equipped to deal with the issues the manipulator is taking advantage of. Too much bureaucracy. If you are being lured into a business deal and you notice the paperwork to be completed is excessive in the context of the nature and size of business, you may wish to rethink your position. Many times, such overwhelming bureaucracy can hide weaknesses that could potentially work against you as a business or an individual. Any process that leaves you minimal time to scrutinize it in advance could be used to influence you unfairly. Raised negative voice. If you can avoid paying attention to someone speaking loudly in a negative voice, you may save yourself from being manipulated. Manipulators who employ this method assume that being loud and displaying negative emotions is bound to intimidate you into submission. These individuals' aggressive manner of talking is usually accompanied with some conspicuous body language, like animated hand gestures, and they think the entire communication style is going to influence you into submitting to their coercive behavior. If you react emotionally or try to explain yourself to such a person, the situation only becomes worse for you. That is why it is advisable to find a way of removing yourself from the situation. That way, you avoid the drama and the stress that comes with it. Upsetting surprises. Avoid succumbing to unpleasant surprises, especially when dealing with a serious topic like a business deal discussion. A person intending to manipulate you into accepting an unfair deal may drop in an additional condition just when the deal is about to be sealed, while pretending that the crucial piece of information is also new to him/her. In such a scenario, it would be better to postpone the signing of the deal until you have had ample time to evaluate the impact of the new condition. If you feel pressure being put on you to close the deal, take that as a red flag, even if you are yet to determine what the actual risk is. This aspect of manipulation is like the tendency manipulators have of according their targets minimal time restraints to assess proposals and to do due diligence. Demeaning humor. Any humor meant to dent your image or competency is best avoided. If someone points out in front of others a weakness he/she finds in you, and you act as if you've never heard it, you succeed in decimating the negative vibe the individual wanted to create against you. By refusing to become defensive, you deprive the manipulative individual fodder to make you feel even worse. Good examples of demeaning highlights include speaking of your success in a sarcastic manner or poking fun at your manner of dressing. While the former is meant to make you doubt your capabilities, the latter is intended to erode your self-esteem. In short, anyone who tries to magnify your apparent weaknesses while trying to water down your successes is a manipulator who should be ignored. How manipulation exacerbates crime. Manipulation is not only a danger to the individuals being manipulated, but also a risk to the entire system trying to curb crime. Psychologist Bruce Tulloch, a PhD holder who has vast experience working with criminals and officers of the law, asserts that there is plenty of manipulation in correctional facilities, which is manifested in different ways. Sometimes officers are manipulated, and they unwittingly find themselves compromised in a manner that makes them abet crime or simply become complacent. A good example is an officer being manipulated to enter into a personal relationship with a criminal. Other times, officers within correctional facilities may find themselves facilitating trafficking of prohibited items, such as drugs or even disclosing information of a classified nature. There are also times where they overlook certain institutional procedures, laxity that may put other officers at risk, in addition to creating loopholes for crime. Quoting some experts, Allen and Bosta, Professor Tolak points out that often manipulation is subtle and it is affected over time. As an officer in a correctional facility, for example, there are those inmates who may choose to be friendly and helpful to you, cooperative even when others are being difficult, and extra attentive whenever you speak. They may persistently tell you how grateful they are to be under your supervision, and find things to compliment you about. Over time, you may develop a special liking for these individuals, and any time an official report is needed, you are likely to have good things to say about them. Unknowingly, you will have been subtly manipulated by these individuals, making it easy for them to be considered for parole or even have their sentences commuted. It is considered manipulation if the individuals had not genuinely reformed but just faked good behavior. Manipulation by psychopaths. Professor Tulloch points out psychopaths are exceptional at manipulation, and that people need to be more careful about them because they do not have a conscience. The manipulation they do is meant to cause their targets harm, sometimes of an emotional or social nature, other times of a physical nature, sometimes coupled with financial harm. What psychopaths are mainly interested in, according to the professor, is to dominate and gain fame, and generally to feel powerful. According to psychologist Paul Babiak and Professor Robert Hare, expert in psychopathy and known for his research in criminal psychology, psychopaths have classic charm, and they come across as normal and friendly, and that makes them difficult to suspect amidst other people. Hare has also indicated in some of his publications that psychopaths constitute between 5% and 10% of all people under incarceration, and they are the most treacherous of all manipulators. He says that although not every manipulator is a psychopath, every psychopath is a manipulator and a real predator. Major targets of manipulation. Bud Allen, an officer of the law with vast experience in correctional facilities, together with Diana Bosta, an educational consult, both of whom co-authored the bestseller Games Criminals Play, say in their publication that manipulators do not always target individuals they consider to be weak. On the contrary, they seek to capitalize on the strong and admirable qualities they observe in an individual, using them against that person. They highlight 4 factors that pose the greatest risk to an individual when it comes to making one a target. These are one's situation, one's personality, one's attitude, and a person's vulnerability. How manipulators capitalize on situations. One of the situations that leave people open to manipulation include being in close proximity to manipulators. If the kind of work you do involves interacting with criminals, then you can easily become their target. Experts Babiak and Hare have observed that many people tend to underrate the prevalence of manipulators who have a criminal mind, and even their potential to act in a ruthless and dangerous manner. Among the people most likely to become situational targets of manipulation are prison officers, staff at correctional facilities, and officers involved in policing within local communities. Hare noted in his 1993 publication that the incidence of such individuals being manipulated by the criminals they interact with is tenfold that of everyone else. The reason is that if you are within an institutional setup, manipulators are able to direct their predatory focus on you. While underlying that point, Allen and Bosta pointed out that individuals whose contact with criminals is personal, meaning they interact on a one-to-one basis, are at a high risk of manipulation, especially if that relationship is continuous. Compassionate people are also easy targets, and anyone who comes across as kind. Manipulators understand that people who are ethical and who always want to be fair can easily be blind to the evil others do, hence they can easily fall prey. Other easy targets include those generally optimistic and hopeful. They are likely to excuse wrongdoers and to imagine their mistakes were inadvertent. The same case is applicable where individuals are very lenient and forgiving. Another common target is the kind of people who mostly work in isolation, or those who, though working among other people, are not under any close supervision. These become easy targets because they can get away with bending rules without being caught. It is for this reason that Kevin Gilmerton, a psychologist who has also worked as a police officer, asserts that it is helpful to have a clear command chain and standard procedures in an institution. It helps reduce the risk of manipulation. People in authority or those with influence are also targeted by criminals for manipulation. The reality is that psychopathic criminals relish bragging about their personal conquests, and succeeding in manipulating a powerful person gives them great satisfaction. Hare has noted that in his publications, even as he pointed out that there are many people who work closely with criminals, especially in correctional facilities, but seem ignorant of how powerful they appear to the criminals. He advises that anyone whose actions can influence how the experience the inmate has within the institution should consider himself or herself powerful from the inmate's point of view. This includes anyone who makes a report at any level pertaining to the inmates. How manipulators capitalize on personality. Surprisingly, criminal manipulators also target intelligent people who are ardent problem solvers, results-oriented, or perfectionists, probably because these kinds of people are so focused on producing great results that they do not notice when someone is behaving in a malicious way. In this category of easy targets, individuals are particularly vulnerable if their profession involves giving people direct help. Examples of professions whose staff is vulnerable to manipulation by criminals include nursing, social services, prisons, the probation department, psychology, and even teaching. Whereas these service providers are invested in helping the people put under their charge, these manipulators have a deep urge to manipulate them to satisfy their own perverse desires. Hare, in his experience in psychology, has noted that many people whose work involves rendering assistance to others are generally compassionate, and it is that positive attribute that manipulators exploit in tricking them. How manipulators capitalize on one's attitude. Criminal manipulators have been noted to target people who are self-assured, those who mostly tend to be complacent. Such people may think they have nothing to be concerned about, and in the process, the criminal's machinations catch them off guard. There are also those individuals whose attitude is one of superiority. Once a manipulator has noticed you are that kind of person, he/she will lavish you with praise that is not genuine or from the heart, and that can make you vulnerable. Chapter 6. Manipulative Seduction. Seduction refers to a person's act of consciously luring another into entering some form of relationship, or deliberately leading someone astray. For instance, if a man or woman makes a deliberate effort to lure someone into a sexual relationship, the luring individual can be said to be exercising seduction. In many cases, people seduce others by making something look appealing. For example, in the eyes of young people, it is appealing to hack a complex system and not be caught. As such, when young, educated individuals manage to hack financial systems and steal from corporations, and yet manage to escape detection, the behavior tends to reflect heroism to those who get to know about it. Hence, the vice of system hacking could attract more young emerging adults who have the skills to do so. In short, some young individuals will have been manipulated into becoming system hackers through enticement or what can be termed seductive manipulation. Just as sexual seduction can be accomplished without speaking, so seduction that leads to acts of corruption. For example, young educated adults just need to see the life of luxury their corrupt age mates are leading for them to succumb to the temptation of hacking systems or carrying out other acts of corruption. The word seduction has assimilated into English from the Latin language, where its meaning is leading astray. That is why there is room for the word to be used to denote something negative. Seduction in marketing. In the field of marketing, the term seduction may be used with positive connotation, where it means the process of increasing the chances of your target's compliance or willingness. It involves charming a potential client in a manner to reduce any unwarranted fears he/she may harbor regarding the offer or proposal being made. In an article carried by Forbes magazine in 2011, then Inaria Strategic Design's director, Leah Poehler, is said to have given examples of Apple, BMW, and Nike as firms that use seduction as effective marketing. He expressed his form of seduction as one where charm was used on potential customers as a way of catching their attention, with a view to gradually whetting their appetite. What Poehler described as trying to appeal to as many of their target senses as feasible. In expressing how positively seduction can be used for marketing purposes, Poehler equated the process to one used when dating. To be effective, you need to first establish your contact, display your good qualities, indicate what your values are, make lots of inquiries, pay attention to your target's responses, address any objections expressed, get over any fears or shyness you may have, exercise generosity, and show that you also have vulnerabilities. That process, according to Poehler, is likely to charm your target because you come across as someone trying to woo the individual, rather than one trying to impress him/her. Still, there are some business people who use seduction solely for selfish reasons, with no regard for the interest of the client. For example, being aware that it is in the human nature to want to be liked or appreciated. Some business people start off a conversation by praising their target. That approach is meant to make the individual feel special, and soon, their vulnerability makes them receptive to whatever offers the endearing person makes. A simple example would be when a boutique attendant welcomes a customer and immediately compliments him/her on his/her dressing, pointing out that she/he has great taste. Such a customer is likely to take the attendant's words seriously when she/he proceeds to make recommendations on suitable outfits. In short, a shop attendant or any other salesperson can make great sales by seducing the potential customer at the earliest opportunity. The role of seduction in such cases becomes significant if the items purchased are really not up to the standard they were hailed to be, meaning the salesperson will have used seduction manipulatively. Psychologists have noted that people keep fighting for what they desire on a day-to-day basis, and the majority of people do it responsibly and in a manner that is not destructive to anyone else. Nevertheless, there is a proportion of people who lie their way into achieving what they want, some of the lies being executed as a result of seduction. According to experts, people who rely on manipulative seduction detest being denied what they want. Since they cannot withstand the feeling of losing, they choose the sly approach, where they strive to achieve the goal before their target can become aware of what is happening. It is important to note that while targets of conventional seduction may not be aware of it at first, they soon get to recognize it and go along with it, because it makes them feel valued. They appreciate the flattery. On the contrary, targets of seductive manipulation are often not aware of it until the perpetrator has achieved his/her goal. and that makes them victims of malicious actions. Sweet-talking a customer into buying a gadget on the pretense it is durable and of high quality, while it is actually a cheap model, falls under the latter form of seduction. Many times, victims of seductive manipulation, like the one just exemplified, have no recourse, because the perpetrator will have long disappeared, leaving behind no reliable contact. The reason it is important to recognize seductive manipulation is to avoid becoming a victim. If the seduction is in the form that makes you feel good about yourself and boosts your ego, there is no harm going along with it. However, if you sense the seduction is the manipulative kind, you should be prepared to counter it in a wise manner, meaning without necessarily antagonizing the manipulator. One way of accomplishing this would be to express your appreciation for any compliments given, while politely making it clear you are not interested in the item or undertaking being proposed. One expert in seduction techniques for sales purposes, Mr. Tom Mallins, highlights 3 features important for successful seduction. These include demonstrating that what is on offer is of great value, showing the bigger picture, and delinking yourself from the results. What these features by deduction mean, starting with the first one, is that if someone is strongly suggesting you get involved in something but cannot make you see the value in it, very likely this individual is trying to manipulate you solely for his/her own good, as opposed to a mutual benefit. Scarcity is one feature that raises the perception of value of a commodity, and that applies to the value of services individuals offer too. Taking the case of motivational speakers as an example, those who are difficult to secure due to their busy schedule tend to offer more value than those who are readily available. While some good professionals may be rarely sought because of other factors like being new in the market, generally, the basic principle that rare is more valuable still holds. For that reason, you should be wary of people who make you open offers on the basis that you are special. Such offers may be tantamount to seductive manipulation. It is important to remember that items of great value, whether tangible like sales products or intangible like advice, are scarce and rarely freely given. People with criminal intentions have been known to trap their targets by making offers of precious things with dire consequences. A January 2019 article in the Business Insider gave examples of how job seekers are seduced by fraudulent employers, who promise big salaries even when one has no job experience. Often, the unsuspecting applicants end up taking up the jobs far away from home, where the environment is toxic and the work conditions are inhumane. Eileen Sharaga, a career expert, says that an offer of a salary that is too high for your qualifications or experience should be a red flag. It might mean the work environment is too toxic for more qualified and experienced individuals to tolerate. Also, firms that make you alluring offers verbally, but are not ready to put the benefits down in writing, could be just seducing you manipulatively. There are also those companies that try to lure you from your existing job, but cannot spell out for you what the strategic plans, benefits, or contract terms of their respective companies are. Such companies may have an uncertain future, or they may be too disorganized to tell for certain where they are headed. For this reason, joining them would mean you have an uncertain future as well, or losing out in the end. Deborah Wheatman, a certified career coach, warns that you should be wary of firms that offer lucrative pay, but are too eager to hire you without giving you time to consider the offer. There is the risk of finding out later that some clauses in your contract are prejudicial to you as an employee or service provider. In such a case, the hefty pay is meant to seduce you in a manipulative way. Again, if the individual making you an offer is not enthusiastic about showing you the bigger picture, where he/she shows you why the offer is attractive and instead intends to only get you emotionally involved so that you are fully sold to the idea, most likely the real big picture is not beneficial to you. In other words, someone whose offer is genuine is patient enough to build rapport with you, understand what your reservations may be, and show you how they can be practically and effectively addressed. A rushed project, one that does not go through these stages, is often made with fraudulent intentions. The third feature involving successful seduction, the one of delinking yourself from the final results, means that as a marketer, you should remain as professional as possible, ensuring your emotions do not reflect in your marketing strategy. There are cases where, for example, individuals trying to promote a given product become emotional to the extent of showing frustration when their audience fails to show interest in buying the product. The reason such marketers become frustrated and sometimes annoyed is that they believe rejection of their product is a personal rejection of them as individuals. So when Mr. Malins recommends that you free yourself from the final results of your marketing strategy, he means that you should not take personally rejection of your product. Rather, consider your marketing seduction as a business process meant to benefit both the business and your potential client. It is important to remember that the seduction criminals do is meant to benefit themselves personally. A selfish endeavor. In short, marketers who understand that seduction in marketing is a positive move are able to continue applying it effectively, without being discouraged when their pitch does not yield results. For the sake of clarity, consider a salesperson that makes a pitch on a quality product for his/her company. Such an individual is not personally hurt if the audience do not commit to buying the product. The fact that he/she knows that the product is valuable makes him/her confident it will soon find willing buyers at its set price. On the contrary, a person whose intention is to manipulate you praises his/her product in order to seduce you. And if you do not commit to buying it, he/she is personally hurt and may resort to threats. Alternatively, he/she may state the exaggerated goodness of the product, but refuse to respond to further inquiries about it for fear of being discovered to be a fraud. In summary, seductive manipulation in the business scene or work environment, while not as dangerous as seductive manipulation of a social nature, can cost you or your business massive losses. And as an individual, it could cost you your career. Chapter 7. Conclusion. The issue of criminality is a complex one. Not only because criminality is destructive to individuals, institutions, and the society in general, but also because the foundation from which it develops is not always clear. Some people are born with inherent traits of criminality, while others develop the behavior from the environment within which they live. As has been noted, criminality is disruptive in whatever sphere of life it pervades, be it social, economic, or any other. One of the biggest challenges for psychologists, psychiatrists, and other professionals interested in correcting the vice is determining whether a given criminal is naturally so, or if his/her behavior is acquired. The reason this needs to be known is that either situation requires its own unique approach for the individual to be rehabilitated. As much as law enforcers have for a long time focused on punitive measures, various professionals have established there is need for a multidisciplinary approach to solving the problem of criminality. There are many scientists and medics who are prepared to work with other professionals with a view to finding solutions to the issue of criminality in society. Incidentally, among the known common criminals are psychopaths and sociopaths. And because they are normally among the most insensitive individuals, their acts of crime are often heinous. For this reason, the society generally supports the punitive approach the judiciary, police, and other law enforcers take in trying to weed communities of these criminals. That is, unfortunately, the reason the experts advocating for a broader approach to curbing crime may continue to have a hard time bringing all stakeholders on board. It is easy to understand why communities may wish to see offenders who do not show any remorse incarcerated, without much talk about non-punitive measures. It is important to note that even if all stakeholders within the judicial system backed psychologists and other researchers who favor a multi-pronged approach to solving the problem of criminality, there are still other challenges that make it hard to tackle the issue. One of them is the fact that psychopathic criminals are good at living in camouflage. At home, at work, in social setups, and elsewhere, a psychopath may pass as an arrogant individual just because psychopaths are often contemptuous to other people, while nobody contemplates looking into the possibility of the person being a criminal. Also, because psychopaths are not capable of making emotional attachments with normal people, but instead tend to overcompensate with artificial bonds. People around are not able to easily recognize that the relationships are fake. Hence, people within the same community as psychopaths often end up opening up to these criminals on the basis of the superficial relationships, and the criminals are able to perpetrate their criminal acts. Another challenge that experts may face while dealing with criminals is that those who are sociopathic are not only impulsive, but also erratic. Without consistency and predictability of behavior, it may be very difficult to catch such criminals, or even to deter their acts of criminality. This is an unfortunate state of affairs, because the impulsive and erratic behavior of sociopaths usually involves bouts of extreme anger, which is normally either unprovoked or minimally provoked. Various horrendous crimes have been committed over the years by sociopaths who have acted on the spur of the moment, but without any basis for a criminal act, it becomes difficult for even psychiatrists to offer meaningful support to the justice system in terms of corrective or future preemptive measures. It is an even bigger challenge for psychologists and other experts when it comes to researching the genetic origin of psychopathic behavior, and how it can be preempted. As such, a process would involve making certain children subjects of experimentation on the presumption they are predisposed to criminal behavior. There is a big risk that some people, including human rights activists, might view such research studies as being discriminatory, or at the minimum as having potential for abuse. Yet it has been established that the brains of psychopaths are normally underdeveloped, a fact that is seen to contribute to the criminal behavior of these individuals. On the contrary, the behavior of sociopaths is understood to emanate from exposure to certain unfavorable environmental factors. And so it is feasible to work towards reducing incidences of sociopathic behavior by alleviating the contributory factors. For example, children who do not have a favorable home environment can be handled by the Social Services Department with guidance and support from psychologists and law enforcement officers. Particularly because, besides physical and psychological abuse, children also become susceptible to sociopathic behavior when they are not given proper guidance and leadership. There is also latent crime that has persisted to be a challenge to the judicial system and the society at large. The biggest reason being that it is difficult to identify latent criminals within a community. Many criminals remain latent, as they do not appear in any official records, sometimes because they were never identified, and if they were identified, they were not reported for various reasons. One of the reasons for criminals not being reported is intimidation, and fortunately, this is a challenge law enforcers can handle. One way this can be done is sensitization of the public on the detriment of covering up for a criminal. Another is ensuring there's sufficient protection for individuals and families of people who help to identify criminals. It is crucial to note that although unreported criminals are unlikely to be pursued by the law enforcement department, it may reach a time when members of the community are fed up with crime in their midst, and therefore resort to taking law into their own hands. If matters get to this dangerous point, the community might take action on the wrong people, as it is not professionally equipped to identify criminals. In the meantime, the real criminals would continue to remain latent and roam among the people. Cases like these have been noted where members of the public report crimes, but a weak justice system fails to record them, or where they are recorded and shoddy investigations lead to the courts dismissing the cases. Where latent criminals thrive because their cunningness is too great for law enforcers, more efficiency in the law enforcement system can remedy the situation. The same case applies where officers of the law are either negligent or are often compromised by the criminals or people close to them. It is important to note the significant link between latent criminals and psychopaths, considering latent criminals are those that manage to escape detection. As for psychopaths, they are good at leading lives that are apparently normal, while at the same time leading a disguised parallel life of crime. The existence of mental illness as a contributory factor to criminal latency makes it difficult to deal with the problem. As has been noted, attention deficiency hyperactivity, or ADHD, is one form of mental illness that gives way to criminal latency, mostly because the mental condition is rarely properly diagnosed. So, a child whose potential for criminality would have been deterred at an early age ends up reaching adolescence before his/her problem has been identified. And usually it is the child's deviant behavior that is underlined and not any underlying mental illnesses. This means that if authorities were to give prominence to early detection of mental illnesses, there would be a greater chance of criminal latency associated with ADHD being mitigated. When it comes to the welfare of children, all sectors of the society should make deliberate effort to pay attention, because anyone might get a chance to observe signs of delinquency early that are not really of a criminal nature, but which need to be handled through cognitive behavioral therapy. Treating children or adolescents with mental illnesses like social deviance might encourage the bad behavior, but treating the mental disorders is likely to prevent high rate of school dropout and dependence on alcohol or illegal drugs. It has also already been noted that in a bid to mitigate criminality, the issue of illicit drugs needs to be addressed. There are statistics that show over half of the people arrested for crime are on drugs at the time of arrest, and this is testament that drugs, or even alcohol on its own, can enhance incidences of crime. It is easy to relate arrests of criminals under influence with latent criminality, because even individuals who are ordinarily careful to conceal their crimes, the way latent criminals happen to be, are bound to become somewhat reckless when under the influence of either alcohol or drugs. The human base urges become overwhelming at such a time, and these individuals can no longer be as inhibited as before. Among the forms of latent criminality that can be mitigated by governments are the ones that arise from poverty. While parents and members of the community might not declare children among them to be criminals, they are often aware that they sometimes commit petty crimes in order to get food and other basic necessities. On that basis, it can be deduced that if such adverse conditions were mitigated, there would be fewer children committing veiled or concealed petty crimes. Considering that crimes associated with theft of property was found to total 7 million in 2018, it means that taking care of children who have potential to grow into thieves would deter that figure from rising. This conclusion is underlined by the fact that, statistically, adversity has been found to make individuals 4 times more vulnerable as far as potential to commit crimes is concerned. That is why CEO Joel Berg has been reported to say that people who steal food for their own consumption should not be condemned. In any case, it is the responsibility of civilized society, led by their governments, to ensure that everyone is well provided with basic necessities. In fact, the UN holds the position that it is possible to eliminate hunger in the world, and holds governments responsible for spearheading this initiative. In its 2018 report during the World Food Day, the Food and Agricultural Organization, or FAO, which is part of the UN, explained that it is in the interest of countries, and not just the business community, to have hunger eliminated. The organization further said that improving living standards for the most vulnerable in society is not just the morally right thing to do, but it is also good for business, as people's purchasing power would be enhanced and reinvested back into the economy. Certainly, communities whose people have sufficient income to cater for their basic needs would have fewer of their children trying to fend for themselves through petty crime. Technology is another factor that has helped to conceal criminal activities, especially of a financial nature. And although many technology-based crimes can be detected through audit trails, this feature does not help many individuals and companies who are yet to understand its importance. As such, theft through financial systems has continued to cost private and government institutions millions of dollars. Fortunately, this is a problem that can be easily solved by acknowledging that danger prevails even in otherwise automated systems and taking preventative measures. Such measures include installation of technology-based controls, such as those that provide audit trails, investing in licensed technology-savvy auditors, and minimization of manual input into systems. The importance of engaging the services of auditors who are licensed is that these professionals are not only capable of identifying security weaknesses and recommending ways of rectifying them, but they can also be held liable for any losses occurring from negligence. It needs to be noted that although technology has made operations faster, failure to deter breaches can cost institutions more than it costs them to pay for manual operations. It is also important to note that no institution is immune from security breaches if appropriate measures are not taken to preempt them. The case of the U.S. Medicare system that Global Financial Integrity has cited as having been compromised through fraudulent activity serves to emphasize this point. Besides financial losses incurred by business through technology-enabled fraud, other losses are incurred by families and the society in general, and they may even be more sensitive than financial losses. For example, the population of internet users that has already exceeded 1 billion produces billions of technology-based activities. And even a fraction of that number that is of criminal nature can be difficult to identify before harm is done. In fact, it is for this reason that a large number of latent criminals operate through the internet. Still, there is hope that internet-based criminals will, over time, find it difficult to hide, because individual service providers are becoming more open to helping governments to nab such criminals and to deprive them of their misused power and anonymity. In the second week of January 2021, for instance, Twitter, believing the US president through his tweets, incited individuals who rioted and broke into the US Congress, leading to many casualties and deaths of 5 people, banned him from the platform for good. Non-governmental organizations involved in enhancing of security have also shown interest in helping governments fight internet-based crime. The UN, for example, through its Office on Drugs and Crime, reaffirmed during its General Assembly of 2011 to continue developing counter-terrorism-related legal knowledge, meant to mitigate the use of the internet to support terrorist activities. In fact, UN Office on Drugs and Crime, or UNODC, offers help to states that are members of the UN in strengthening their respective judicial systems. Whether their challenge is safeguard of human rights, counterterrorism, or others. Accenture plc, a multinational that is an expert in technology, has found that over the 5 years preceding 2020, the amount of losses business have suffered through cybercrime has risen by around 72%. It also needs to be appreciated that some crimes not directly related to finances, like those of a social nature, end up having a financial impact on families, the government, and the society in general. It is this level of seriousness that led the World Economic Forum of 2020 to recommend that Internet Service Providers, or ISPs, adopt 4 crucial principles, one being protection of consumers from cyber attacks. Another of the 4 principles is raising threat-related awareness among consumers and helping them and their networks to remain protected from unwarranted intrusion. The 3rd principle recommended to ISPs is liaising with hardware manufacturers as well as manufacturers of software and communication infrastructure to ensure security levels are enhanced. The final principle recommended to ISPs pertains to reinforcement of proper defense to counter attacks by taking action that enhances routing as well as signaling security. Routing has to do with how computers communicate with one another, which is fundamental to internet operations. This channel of communication is known to be prone to attacks. The reason the World Economic Forum recommended it be a focus for ISPs all over the world. The role of religion and the law cannot be ignored in the fight against criminality, and alongside these is the role of institutions. Considering that it is in human nature to want to satisfy their base urges like greed and sexual desires, it is crucial that there be safeguards of a legal, social, and institutional nature to keep individuals under check. Civilization that comes with education has indisputably helped in this regard, and religion has been found to give individuals and communities the moral compass that serves as a guide. That is why, for example, African herders who used to steal animals from neighboring tribes as an act of heroism are now viewed with contempt by the society. Such changes in outlook have helped to reduce the criminal acts of theft as well as abductions of women that were carried out during such raids. At the same time, when tribes avoid raiding one another for the purpose of animal theft, the risk of assault on stock owners and casualties as the victims try to ward off the invasion is avoided. As Karl Marx, Max Weber, and other sociologists have affirmed, religion is good at enhancing social cohesion, meaning that peace is maintained and people live in harmony. In such an environment, acts of hooliganism and crime are almost non-existent, with people living in a manner that is socially acceptable as a matter of principle and practice. Durkheim has also pointed out that religion, which has been found to cultivate a common mindset in society, is great at showing individuals that it is sensible to continue living even when faced with tragedy. This sensibility can be credited with reducing incidences of suicide, which in itself is a crime. As for institutions like the police that are charged with maintenance of law and order, they need not only to be strengthened in terms of their mandate, but also to be well equipped in terms of knowledge and skill sets. When Kiran Bedi, the pioneer Indian police service woman, says she was set on joining the force to ensure she was secure from abuse, it gives the notion that even a strong police force can leave out a section of the population in its role of protection. For this reason, the fight against crime should not only be multi-pronged in terms of its approaches, but it should also be all-encompassing so that children, women, and men are all protected. When it comes to law as a crime deterrent, it is the government and its agencies that are responsible for enforcing it. It is therefore imperative that the government ensures that the individuals in charge are not only skilled and competent, but also morally upright. This means that there will be few officers, if any, who will be compromised by criminals with the intention of defeating the very law they are meant to uphold. It also means that the government officers will not be complacent and let latent criminals continue to be a problem within communities. A lot of evil is perpetrated in society through manipulation, which means that it is not just the targets of the evil deeds that are caught unawares. Even law enforcement officers can be duped. It would therefore be helpful if the police, prosecutors, and also judicial officers would be provided with refresher courses where they are provided with updates of new and emerging manipulation trends. Seminars and workshops may also be of great help, where representatives of various sectors of society and law enforcement officers can brainstorm on crime-related challenges, while making suggestions on what they deem to be the best possible ways of dealing with them. One point that should not be ignored is the importance of making children and other vulnerable members of the society less susceptible to crime. In this regard, schools, religious institutions, social clubs, and even individual family units should make a point of discussing the existence of manipulative individuals, how to identify manipulative behavior, and how to escape manipulation. These measures are important because unless safeguards are put in place, the negative effect on manipulation will continue causing damage to the lives of individuals, breaking family units, and destroying societies. Since unstable families and societies are optimal breeding grounds for criminals, it means that uncontrolled manipulation can cause crime to continue in generational cycles. It should also be remembered that the danger of manipulation also pervades working environments, where targets are mostly subordinates and perpetrators individuals in positions of power. When manipulation thrives in political institutions, the result is often tyrannical tendencies. The danger with the latter case is that when citizens can no longer tolerate the tyranny, they tend to fight back in crude ways, like civil war, or staging coups that end up causing bloodshed and casualties. In short, curbing manipulation is not just for the sake of protecting people's egos and keeping communities happy. It is also about ensuring that leaders do not behave in a manner that can eventually lead to anarchy. Another important thing to consider, even as there is hope of nabbing criminals, is that there is still room to escape the law if the judicial system has officers who are vulnerable to manipulation. Psychologist Bruce Tullock has already taken note that manipulation has pervaded correctional institutions as well, and it manifests in different ways. For example, not all officers are manipulated because they are incompetent. Some fall prey to manipulators because they are too trusting and sympathetic. For example, a convict may manifest good behavior for weeks or even months, knowing quite well that their target officer is bound to win their trust in due course. Soon, the manipulative criminal takes advantage of such trust to commit or abet crime, such as smuggling drugs into the facility. In the refresher courses, seminars, and workshops suggested, officers in correctional facilities and other institutions that handle criminals would be reminded of the nature of manipulators, one of the characteristics being their classic charm. They need to be reminded that, in a bid to manipulate, criminals can appear normal, harmless, and even friendly. Hence, when they execute their insidious plan, their actions catch the guards and other officers unexpectedly. It is worth noting also that seductive manipulation is just as dangerous in corrective institutions, because even hardcore criminals, who initially appear hostile, can camouflage their coarse behavior and pretend to be soft, harmless, and even vulnerable. If they succeed in making the officers trust them, they might end up causing harm to those same officers, fellow inmates, and people outside the correctional facility. As has been noted earlier, seductive manipulation can be carried out in a similar manner as sexual seduction, in terms of swaying the target so that he/she ends up being a willing participant. This means it is the kind of manipulation that has the risk of jeopardizing the career of a professional officer. For example, a convict who behaves very well and shows interest in helping out might win the officer in charge, so that he/she is assigned duties outside the facility, like collecting trash around the prison perimeter wall. If such a convict ends up carrying out a crime because of the officer's misplaced trust, that particular officer would come across as an enabler, if not an accomplice, just because of his/her laxity. On the overall, any form of seduction should be well analyzed before going along with it. In marketing, you need to be certain the product or service being offered has more benefits for you so that you do not make any unnecessary financial losses. In social life, you need to ascertain that no danger is likely to befall you if you accept a given proposition. Young adults, for example, should find out when they are seduced with quick riches, if the means of acquiring the riches is fraudulent or deceitful. Because it is always sad to see individuals who have taken time to acquire a good education, spending years in jail instead of building a stable career or business, and being a productive member of society. Finally, it is important that individuals and governments realize that dealing with crime is more expensive than preempting it. Hence, parents should do their best to nurture their children in a manner to dissuade them from criminal activities. As governments allocate sufficient funds to help make correctional facilities and the judicial system more efficient. The end.